opportunity to learn about the New Jersey Windport project from one of the leaders in this particular project, which is Julia Courtray. She is a senior project officer at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, where she supports the development of the New Jersey Windport and the offshore wind supply chain in New Jersey. Julia collaborates with offshore wind industry stakeholders, including developers and manufacturers, in addition to public and social sector partners, to create new offshore wind initiatives and operates in New Jersey, and opportunities, in New Jersey. Prior to the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, Julia worked on various social policy issues in Washington, D.C., including women's economic security, paid family and medical leave, and domestic food security. She was an Emerson National Hunger Fellow at the Congressional Hunger Center, with placements at the Texas Hunger Initiative and Congressional Research Service. She holds an MPA from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University and a BA from Emory University. Please welcome Julia Courtray from the New Jersey Economic Development Authority.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you all for making time to hear my presentation today. I'm so excited to share with you what we've been up to with the port, as well as what we are doing more broadly around the industry and opportunities for your business to get involved or to get more active in your city or community. It's exciting to hear the various groups that are on the call today. So I'll try to make sure to touch base on those various areas of interest. But I'll go ahead and dive into my presentation here. So as you may have heard the governor say many times, offshore wind is really a once in a generation opportunity for the state. We expect over $100 billion in investment over the next 15 years along the East Coast, as states seek to both transition their grid to 100% clean energy, create green and clean jobs, as well as fortify their electrical grid. We see the wind port and the other investments that we're making as a state to be critical to capturing as much of our of this investment, to be specifically in New Jersey. And we are super excited about the opportunities these will bring, especially for the southern part of the state. So before I dive in, I wanted to anchor in on the timelines for the various projects. So as you're thinking about whether you're a business or a city or another group, when and how do I get involved? I think it's a first good step is to think about the solicitations that the Board of Public Utilities issues every 2 years to build a new wind farm. So New Jersey has a commitment to 7.5 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2035. And in order to get to that, to reach that goal, we have set up a solicitation schedule of 6 solicitations. We issued our first one as a state in 2018, which was won by Ørsted and their Ocean Wind project with 1,200 megawatts being produced by the end of 2024 here. So as you're thinking about where the timing here, you can see the second project has begun through the solicitation process. So developers have submitted their applications and their bids, and we expect an award sometime by the end of Q2 2021, and then that project will be operational in 2027. So the process really starts over every 2 years, and there's a whole timeline from siting and permitting to installation to the ongoing operations and maintenance that'll continue on for decades through the lifespan of a project. And I'll kind of come back to this timeline as we cover a couple of topics here. So most excitingly, of course, is the New Jersey Windport. It is our crown jewel investment as a state to support the industry. There is very little space on the East Coast that can meet the unique specifications and needs of the offshore wind industry for marshaling, manufacturing, storage, and laydown area. That's because the components are so large that they have to be transported in barges, usually vertically, to minimize the amount of handling in the ocean as a safety precaution. And therefore they can't fit under any bridges or other overhead restrictions like a train system or large power lines type of thing. So Lower Alloways Creek in Salem County was identified as a perfect location because of its open access to the Atlantic Ocean, plentiful space to be able to build and expand in the future, as well as a strong history and legacy of manufacturing and industrial production that we felt confident that this part of the state would be well equipped to carry out the goals of this project and support the New Jersey wind port for decades to come. So in terms of the vision of the port, we expect the first, the wind port to open by the end of 2023 with marshaling in this big green circle that I've highlighted here. Marshaling is where all of the components come together. So you'll see the towers, the blades, the nacelles, all the things that go into the water will come here for final assembly and staging so that they're grouped together, somewhat assembled, so that just the final pieces have to be, clicked into place on the ocean. So this is an incredibly important area for logistics, transportation, support. There's actually lots of needs for things like sand and gravel as they're moving and transporting items. And then we have a vision for expansion for manufacturing that could support up to 160, 170 acres of manufacturing in the future. And that manufacturing, as I'll detail here, can cover a number of items. So the diagram to the left, you'll see it's labeled with blades, rotors, nacelles, towers. Those are types of components that we would imagine being produced at the wind port. Because of their size, the amount of space they needed, they have to be produced at the portside, quayside area. They can't really be transported by rail or by car, or truck. They're just too big. They have to be produced at the port. But that gives a lot of opportunity for smaller components or subcomponents that contribute to these components to be made further inland. And that's where we see a great opportunity for our other areas in South Jersey to produce those components, and then they can be transported by truck or even barge from a facility down or up the river. And then I wanted to note kind of how the wind port fits in with the rest of the facilities for offshore wind. So you may have heard about the Port of Paulsboro and monopile manufacturing at the port there by EEW. So that's, and you can see in the diagram, it's the yellow highlight, or the yellow part of the tower. It goes underwater and into the ground is what anchors it to be securely in the water. It's a gigantic, thousands of tons of steel go into making that. And those go straight into the ocean before any of the other components are added. But it adds another way for to building ecosystem in South Jersey, because there's a lot of cost savings to be had with components being close to each other, as well as efficiencies with procuring different components or different materials like steel and concrete that can be used nearby, whether further inland or at other ports. And then we see places like Atlantic City, Cape May, and Newark areas to be more positioned for operations and maintenance. So once the projects are installed and the wind turbines are in operation, we would expect that these areas would be kind of the homes or the hubs for operations and maintenance activities as they go out into the ocean, repair, service, the turbines, et cetera. There's definitely more opportunities for manufacturing up and down the East Coast of the state, though we see lots of opportunity in South Jersey to build upon these two anchoring assets at both Paulsboro and Lower Alloways Creek. And in terms of economic impact, as you've probably heard, many exciting numbers, and we are, I think, found this to be one of the most compelling reasons to build the port, not only for its strategic value to capturing the supply chain, but also its opportunity to create significant numbers of jobs, economic development, and rippling effects as we expect existing businesses and new businesses to capitalize on this opportunity. So we're expecting construction to start in late 2021. We've issued the RFP. Actually, I should update this slide. We've issued the RFP for the construction manager last week, and that award should be announced sometime later this year. You can find the shortlisted companies publicly on our website. So there are 5 companies that have been shortlisted for the bidding process, and they have, you can find them on the website under bidding opportunities, real estate. I'll put a link into the chat for more information on that. We are excited to hear that Governor Murphy announced a $200 million investment toward supporting the funding of the port in his 2022 budget. And we're looking forward to finalizing the rest of the financing for the project. And then lastly, I'll highlight again, up to 1,500 permanent manufacturing, assembly, and operations jobs in our full vision of the port, as well as hundreds of construction jobs, which are targeted to start by the end of the year. New Jersey has committed a number of items to ensure that this contributes to the Governor Murphy's stronger and fairer promises and commitments. First, we are working to set a new standard for minority and women-owned business inclusion. So we have a 15% set aside goal for minority, women, veteran-owned businesses, and that's 15% of the contract value, as well as set up a advisory committee that supports both diversity and local engagement to ensure that the project reflects the diversity of our state, as well as draws from the talent and the strength of the region in South Jersey. We've also committed to constructing it using union labor and doing it in an environmentally responsible way. And we have made it very clear to the industry that we are trying to develop the port and operate the port in a way that enables competition. So it'll be a neutral asset operated by a third-party operator, and use will be determined through competitive procurement, which will all translate to affordability to the ratepayers. So next I wanted to turn to some about the supply chain development. So as you're kind of wrapping your head around this new industry, there's so many layers. It's very, it can feel very dense and overwhelming as to where to start. I can tell you from my first 2 years working on the industry, there's no shortage of new information and opportunity to learn and get involved. A first step I think would be helpful if you're thinking about where your company can fit in or how your city or area could position itself strategically, is to take a look at the state's offshore wind strategic plan, which the BPU issued last year. And this identifies New Jersey's supply chain localization strategy. We balance the priorities of both local content and energy prices in our localization plan, and expect that, as I mentioned before, the solicitation schedule would drive that localization. So over time, we'll see more and more of the industry localize, but probably the first couple of projects will have a little bit lower local content in terms of the largest manufacturing, the largest contracts, But in terms of the opportunity for smaller businesses and state businesses that are, headquartered in the state, it's a great time to get involved and access that supply chain. You can find more about the Officer Wins strategic plan at the link below here. And I recommend taking a look at the appendices. If you're looking for a specific area or you're trying to understand the timing, that is a great place to start. Next, I wanted to just highlight the supply and value chains here. So there are a number of layers and entry points under which you can get involved in the industry. So the siting and permitting starts several years before even a project may be announced. So if there are lease areas, like you may have heard of Atlantic Shores project off the East Coast, does not currently have a contract with the state, though they've bid for the next project. They're still actively doing work around siting and permitting, and lots of environmental studies have to be done. And then we see things like manufacturing happening a couple of years before the project starts to be installed, and continuing on for part of that installation period. So you can kind of look at the solicitation schedule as to when you would be fitting in. You can also see that there are different tiers of manufacturers and companies, so the size and how directly they work with the developers, like Orsted or Atlantic Shores, really varies with each part of the supply chain. Finally, I wanted to touch base on the tiering, because this is a really common thing folks talk about when they're looking for suppliers or subcontractors. So the developer, like Orsted or Atlantic Shores or Equinor, they manage all of the activities required to deliver the project. So we like to, you think about it kind of like it can be a real estate developer type thing, and the developer for the wind port will be different than who's developing the projects out in the ocean. And oftentimes folks will think that they need to directly contact the developer if they're looking for a business, but it's actually, or it's oftentimes a tier 1, 2, 3 supplier that you'll be directly selling your product or resource to. Tier 1 primarily contract directly with the developers. Those are often companies like OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, who design and produce the turbines, like Siemens Gamesa, GE, MHI Vestas. Whereas secondary and tertiary suppliers might produce the subcomponents, like large bolts or secondary steel platforms, etc. And then again, the timing of the activities is also very important. I won't get into details here, but as you can see, they're staggered, and there's opportunity to plug in at each level. And then finally, I wanted to give you just kind of a quick shorthand as you're thinking about assessing your current capability to service the industry, as well as your opportunities to get into the New Jersey Windport project as well. First, understanding what you'll be supplying. The Windport itself is very similar to any other major infrastructure project, so you won't actually see a lot of, it's kind of like building an airport or a major bridge type of activity. So you won't see too much change in what you might need to produce if you're interested in bidding on as a subcontractor or sub-supplier. Whereas the industry more broadly, you'll see that there are tend to be higher quality and size requirements for many of the components. Second, you want to identify the procurement timeline and ensure that you're able to prepare in time to support and compete or be competitive in wherever you may be bidding into. And relatedly, understanding the safety and business practice expectations. It's an industry just like oil and gas, very focused on safety and strong business practices. They want to know that you're a reliable company, that you're able to deliver on time, and that the quality, that your quality is meets its high standards. And it's a very relationship driven industry. It's a new industry. Companies the big companies are really coming in from abroad and are trying to better understand how to do business in the state, are looking for partners as to navigate, as well as open up facilities in the region. And so building those relationships, even if there's not a immediate there as to what facility they're going to build now, they're looking to get a understanding of the landscape and opportunities to produce with partners in the state, so that they can address their risk, they can have success in the beginning, because they know that New Jersey companies know how to do business in their state, and they want to benefit from working with local workers here. So that's all I have for today. These are also some of my colleagues here that focus on offshore wind. I'd love to hear any reactions, questions, as well as ways that we as EDA can be helpful in supporting any type of educational or outreach goals that you may have. We're really focused right now on trying to better support New Jersey-based businesses and communities that are interested in the industry, so we can make sure that they have the information and skills and resources needed to be competitive for the future projects. Thank you all so much.
Tony, are you going to open this up for some questions?
He's on mute, yeah, but yes, Krista, we are. We do have a time for questions.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Julia, a very good presentation, very comprehensive. As you say, this is new to the United States, that is wind turbine energy. But the Europeans have been doing this for 30 years. They've got a fully developed industry and a fully developed business chain of supplies. Are we, New Jersey EDA or whoever, anybody affirmatively reaching out to the European manufacturers and industrialists to try to woo them here? Because they're doing it in Virginia, and they're doing it in Massachusetts. Are we doing anything to affirmatively induce people, as we've done with EEW, to come to New Jersey to do the manufacturing?
Absolutely, and I appreciate your question, Governor Florio. We are doing a number of outreach internationally, and it's surprisingly been a little bit easier with COVID to have those conversations, with Zoom being much more available, and we're hoping to have more site visits once things open up a little bit more and it's safer for international travel. But what we've noticed is that they're looking for partners in the state to before they make the leap over, specifically with EEW, for example. Now that they're here, we've been hearing that their partners in Europe are interested in coming to New Jersey or nearby, because they have a friend down the road, and they feel that they share a language and expertise that will help them navigate. And with EEW having paved the way there and answered a lot of some of the questions on how to do business in the state, in the United States, and translate what's been done in Europe to the United States, we've seen a lot more comfort in that. In terms of the smaller manufacturers, we've seen kind of two major themes so far. First, waiting to localize after some of the OEM turbine suppliers like MHI or Vestas, Siemens Gamesa, GE locate, that they'll follow their suppliers. And then second, we've seen more recently the interest in connecting with a New Jersey-based business to produce the component that they do in Europe. So we might see a company that does transition pieces and platforms for a wind turbine look for a steel manufacturer in New Jersey that already has facilities that can be somewhat used for their purposes, and work with them to retool and adjust. And so it seems to be a lot of joint venture, joint partnerships, alliances, as a big interest right now.
A wonderful example would be GE, that is the only American manufacturer of turbines, but they're American, but they do all the production in France and the Netherlands, inducing them to think about the wisdom of producing here in this country would be useful. If I could be of any help, let me know.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Julia, we have a question from Christy, I think.
Yes, I see your hand raised, Christy.
Hi, Julia. Yes, as a student will always remain in my head about raising the hand. My question that I have for you is in particularly towards Cumberland County. So we have a very, very diversified group and community here. And I wanted to see if there were some potential opportunities for our area to obtain some information on positions and training that will be needed to in particularly go into our underserved population and do recruitment there, to offer up some training in those pockets. We really are want to be advocates for that, as well as making sure that we're on the cusp and that we have this training available prior to any hiring, because I can only imagine just all the reading that I have been keeping myself up on. There is going to be training that's needed, and we want to make sure that we have a prepared workforce when it's time.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you raising that. We just hired our new managing director for the Wind Institute, Jen Becker, and one of her big priorities right now is to do essentially a quick needs assessment of what are some of the upcoming training needs that don't currently exist in New Jersey. So for example, we can see sub-arc welding that's very unique to offshore wind. It's not actually, or I think it's called submerged welding, submerged arc welding. So it's not actually underwater, it's under sand. But it's something that we don't currently do in New Jersey, to my knowledge. But we could leverage some of the existing resources that we have in the state to support that training. So we're doing an effort, or she's taking a lead on making sure that we've identified those training needs and then setting up the resources and programs to support that training. So we'll hopefully have some more information to share this summer on, publicly on the next steps there. And then in terms of, as you had mentioned about, underserved communities and reaching groups that would really benefit the most from the Windport project and the offshore wind industry's development more broadly, we have incorporated a number of diversity and inclusion requirements in our RFP to the Windport that extend beyond the suppliers, also focus on the workforce. I don't want to break any news here, so when we get it, when we release publicly that information, I will share it out, but it'll have kind of the exact specifics on what our expectations and goals and how we're expecting to reach those goals as part of the Windport project. But it is something that we're deeply committed to, and we want this project to really benefit those who really stand to gain the most from this, and really move the needle on helping to support revitalization and growth in the southern areas or specific areas of the south region of the state.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Anybody else have a question? Julia, how's New Jersey positioned to compete with other states for kind of being the center of this project?
Well, one great thing is that we're in the literal geographic center, and that if you were to put a weight on the East Coast map for where most of the projects and procurements for offshore wind, New Jersey is really at the center of that. It's running from Massachusetts down to Virginia, so we're really quite in the middle of it. We've found that companies make their decisions about where to locate around kind of three big factors. One being access to lease areas and how close they can, what are their steaming distances, transportation costs. And so New Jersey being so close to the New York Bight, which is where we have kind of the biggest opportunity for offshore wind lease areas. You see President Biden has recently made some announcements about offshore wind and expanding offshore wind lease areas. He's specifically referring to that area. So that positions us very well to be close to some of the largest areas and potential. Second, very focused on procurement commitments. So not only are we close to many lease areas, New Jersey has the second highest commitment for procurement of offshore wind energy, only second to New York, which works out well for us that together we're over 50% of the committed procurement. So we're well positioned in that way. And then third is around labor costs and training needs. So we know that New Jersey is committed to supporting fair and living wages for workers, and that sometimes can make our labor costs a little higher. But we also think that because of how well trained and our skilled labor force positions us well to be able to meet the needs of the manufacturing in particular. One of the unique things about the state compared to some of our competitors is how we have such a large range of both middle skilled workers, so folks that have vocational, tech, some college education, as well as those who have lots of high education, which is kind of the two areas or high skilled areas, two areas that we really need workers to support this industry. So whether we need you to be an engineer or we need you to be a wind turbine technician, we have a great foundation for our workers to support the industry in that growth.
Thank you, Julia.
Are there
Julia?
any other questions? Oh, please go ahead.
Hi, so we have Mary on the line. Her mic isn't working, so she asked me to reiterate her comment. She says Carlisle Machine Works, Inc. is a small women-owned manufacturer in UEZ Millville that would like to work with you guys.
Wonderful. I'll share my contact information in the chat. I'll also, specific to the Windport project, we are in the middle of a procurement, so we can't make any types of connections or recommendations. Though kind of your safest bet at this point is to register for our offshore wind supply chain if you haven't already. When companies are looking for a partner in the state or a specific supplier type, we generally point them to the supply chain registry because we're not able to, we can't be picking and choosing winners in the state. And so it's easier, or it's the fairest way we can do it is refer people to the supply chain. So it's a great way for you to raise your hand and say that you're interested. So I've put the link here. It's njeda.com/offshore wind. And if you kind of scroll down toward the bottom of the page, there's the supply chain registry tab, and that you can click and join if you haven't already.
Thank you.
there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Is there any prioritization under the various tiers of contractors in favor of New Jersey produced goods and services?
So are you asking from by the state or for the development industry more broadly?
I would say whether there are guidelines or policies at the state level, or that the major organizations like Orsted are following, that where they're trying to actually procure where they can, at least from New Jersey.
Yes, so this is a huge priority for the state. And we're, I think, somewhat unique in the level of local content expectations that we have for any offshore wind project compared to most other East Coast states, specifically in our RFP solicitation for each offshore wind contract that BPU runs. So I should be clear that I'm completely separate from that. And we have a dividing procurement wall there, so to make sure that we're not interfering with that procurement. But that is to say that there's an emphasis and a significant weight on local content expectations. We have, for example, the EEW manufacturing monopile facility came out of the first solicitation as part of their local content commitments, which is a huge component of the supply chain and will really help support businesses that are interested in being involved in the industry related to steel and some of the supporting things like concrete. And then there's also just a reality that some of the components and services are just cheaper to be done in the United States and in New Jersey and as locally as possible. So siting and permitting, of course, and operations and maintenance are all things that'll be done almost 100% locally because of the nature of the work. And then there are things like manufacturing where some components will automatically, or not automatically, is not the right word, but are essentially expected to be local in each state. And we've been focusing on that. How do we move the needle to bring things faster to New Jersey and bring things that we know are coming to the United States, that they come to New Jersey. And I think the procurement emphasis, as well as our offshore wind tax credit for large capital investments in manufacturing, are our two biggest tools to support that.
Anyone else? Okay, at this time, Julie, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here today as our speaker, and thank everyone else for attending. Governor Florio, thank you so much for being here with us. Christy, I'd just like to say thank you for Cumberland County Workforce Development for being our sponsor today. And Tony Stanzione has a gift card to Bresciano's Florist for a raffle winner. So Tony, if you can name that person right now.
Suzette, can you help me out by asking somebody to choose the number from whatever it is to whatever it is?
Absolutely. Julia, since you were our guest speaker, may you please pick a number from 1 to 42?
I will choose 9.
9, lucky number 9, Jonathan Cummings.
Congratulations, Jonathan.
Congratulations.
And thank you, Julia. Also, I just like to say on May 18th is our next membership and network Zoom meeting. We will have our director who was on the Zoom meeting today, Director Dorella, will be one of our speakers, also the health department and our superintendents from our school systems. And just to remind everybody to, always support our local businesses, make sure you shop locally, and just stay healthy and be safe. And thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much again, Julia. It was very nice. Thank you. We appreciate
Thank you all.
everything you presented today.